Sophia.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Huddle, where we are going to talk about relationships and communications on part 2 with Leigh Owens about understanding the behaviors that plague us. And that's all I'm going to say because we had so much good stuff last week that I can't wait to dive in. So I'm kicking it over to you, Tara and Leigh, and let's get going.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and I'm going to be brief too. I'm not going to do the classic reading of the bio. If you missed last week, I strongly encourage you to start there because Leigh is truly a master at understanding our behaviors, and she's devoted her life to it through her own tumultuous journey that she continues to heal in her own ways. I feel really compelled to share a couple things before I hand it over. One is this. A lot of folks that come on the Daily Huddle, certainly they're doing it with good spirit and good heart, and they hope that they will glean some new clients from it. Leigh has come on here. Clearly, I discovered this after last week. I suspected it, but it rang true. Leigh can't take any more clients. And this is an opportunity for her to help others just by giving of her heart and her brilliance and her time. So I share that because it just reminds us how beautiful the spirit of generosity can be. So I always thank our guests, but I just have just a burning desire to give you an extra special, sincere thank you because you're truly doing this in hopes of helping other people to live their lives in more accordance with their values. And so I just thank you so much. We thought about skipping today because I'm in the Southeast and many of our Daily Huddle families are, and there's so much tragedy around us. And then it hit me that when we're under this kind of stress, we need Leigh's support and knowledge and love more than ever. So I'm here today sitting in my car at the front of my neighborhood because I still don't have power and I still don't have Wi-Fi. And Catherine's going to give me the 2 thumbs down if no one can hear me. But I'm going to quickly turn this over to Leigh. What we wanted to do today, last week, we really focused on what people in our society see as addictive behaviors. But today, we're going to dive into other behaviors that might not be so obviously addictive, but they are ways that our brain is trying to avoid what maybe we really need to uncover so that we can live a more peaceful life. So I thought we would start, Leigh, with you reminding us about the model that you have really customized to your patients and has made so much of a difference in your life. And maybe we'll take it from there. So tell us first, if you will, remind us, refresh us, what is internal family systems?
Okay. So internal family systems is a model of therapy, kind of a lens, if you would say, a lens in which we can look at internally what goes on inside of us at all times. And internal family systems says that humans are kind of multifaceted, that we're made up of parts. And how I like to describe it easiest is when a part of me wants to do something and another part of me with an equal but opposite energy doesn't want to do it. Like, let's say we want to go out to network in our neighborhood. And so a part of us wants to go network. And then another part wants to stay in our pajamas and was like, I don't want to do that at all. I want to stay inside. I want to cuddle up. I want to put my pajamas on. And so this conflict that kind of arises on the inside of us. And this is a model that helps us to kind of understand that because we can kind of feel crazy when we want to do different things equally and opposite.
Okay, so fascinating. So would you just break down that manager versus firefighter versus exile for us?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I will. So in this model, IFS suggests that we have protectors in our system and parts that they protect. And the protectors are split up in between a manager And managers are parts of everybody's system that want them to do good and be good. And so those are the parts that get us up, uh, take us to work, do all of our things that we need to do. Managers are proactive. Firefighters protect us by extinguishing the flame of emotional distress. So if we feel flooded with shame or fear or feelings of rejection or any of the negative emotions that people don't want to feel, these parts of us come in to rescue, and that would be addictions and eating disorders and what we're going to talk about today, some of the not so obvious ones like dissociation and distraction and maybe some ones that people think are good, like all of our overworking parts, right? That'll just go to work, over exercise, things like that.
Okay, awesome. So that's what I thank you for helping us to level set, because I think that's really enlightening on its own. But let's talk about how we can let's just start with maybe my favorite one, which is dissociation. Would you
Yes.
explain to us how dissociation can be a means? First, explain what it is and how it can be a means of coping that that could be a negative function in our lives.
Okay. Dissociation is like a lot of things on a spectrum. It's on a scale. And mild dissociation is probably what people would know is if you had ever gotten highway hypnosis, like you're just driving and you miss your exit. It's like, oh my gosh. Or if you are in a school or a lecture or in a business meeting and you suddenly think, wow, I'm hungry. What am I going to eat for lunch? Oh, that reminds me, I got to go to the grocery store. And so we kind of just go off on this mental checklist. And then maybe 3 to 5 minutes later, we check back in and we've just missed everything that this person is saying, right? We've all done that. And so that is dissociation. Our body is present, but our mind is not. And that becomes a coping mechanism that a lot of people are completely unaware that they are employing because it is kind of automatic, especially people who maybe went through things that overwhelm their ability to cope, which is trauma. We have big T trauma, which people think of as, that's sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, the big T traumas. But the little T traumas are just things that every human being experiences in our life. And anytime it overwhelms our ability to cope. Well, the younger we are, the less ability we have to cope. So if people have gone through things in their life, especially between the ages of 0 and 12, that overwhelm their ability to cope, chances that they dissociate, which is that their body is present but their mind is not, are extremely high. How that affects us in a negative way in our adult life is that if we don't know that we're doing it, it can affect our relationships because we're not present, right? We're not living in the present moment. A lot of people will not experience joy. They'll have depression or unhappiness, but they won't know why. And it's really because they spend most of their life kind of dissociated from their present awareness and what they're feeling. And so we cannot change what we don't acknowledge, and we cannot acknowledge things that we don't know are there.
Wow. So I'm thinking, thank you for that very clear explanation. I'm thinking that a lot of people feel that it's ADHD brain,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yes.
yes.
So ADHD, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and I do have CPTSD, which is complex trauma. And both of those symptoms overlap a lot. So sometimes ADHD and the trauma brain of jumping, our brain just jumps from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. Those symptoms can overlap a lot. So a lot of times if people, well, this is what I've seen in my own journey, working with addicts and being in recovery myself, is that if medication helps someone, if the medication helps, you probably do have ADHD. If the medication doesn't help, you probably just have trauma brain.
Okay, fascinating. And couldn't you have both?
Absolutely. I have both.
Okay. Yeah,
Hmm.
okay. So what I'd love to explore is, and I'll just use myself as an example. That's the safest way to do it. Is I always saw trauma as what you call big T traumas. When I grew
Yes.
up, I had plenty of food. I had a warm bed. People told me they loved me. I got taken to ballet lessons. So I wouldn't for a therapist to suggest that I had trauma. And
Hmm.
I wonder if you experience this. I kind of want to come out fighting like that's a bunch of bullshit. My parents were
Hmm.
good parents.
Hmm.
But if I really look closely,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
I don't want to make this about me, but there are plenty of things that I've told other people, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's the fucking saddest thing I've ever heard."
That's exactly what happens, Tara. And so, and most people, and I love this, we love our parents, even people who did not have the best parents, right? Are still connected to their parents and do not like jumping in and playing the blame game. So I hear that all the time. And so I was like, well, let's just be curious because trauma shows up as symptoms, right? So, like, for example, if we're going to go to the doctor, if you have physical symptoms, right, you're going to go with your symptoms and then they're going to trace that back to give an etiology and then they're going to give a diagnosis based on the symptoms, right? That's basically what people do. They come in with symptoms. And so many of the symptoms are trauma related, and they will say, well, I didn't have any trauma. And I will then say, okay, all trauma means is did you ever experience anything that overwhelmed your ability to cope? And how were you comforted when you were a child? Because a lot of times we do have all of the physical, I did too. I had all of the physical provision, which some people do not, but you had physical provision. But if our parents, and when we grew up, I mean, I'm 58 years old. And so my parents are 83. My grandparents have passed, but all those people came through World War II, the Korean War, the World War I, II, um, the depression. And so feelings and emotions were not valued, probably because they just needed to survive. So
Yes.
we've got generational people who had no idea how to name what they were feeling, much less know what to do next, which is how to comfort and soothe that. So what we're seeing now is just an epidemic of people who have zero idea how to name what they're feeling. And then if you can't name it, but you have to name it to tame it, what do we do next? And so because of that, that is what people are running from, right? So that's rather addiction or even the process addictions is people don't know how to feel
Hmm.
negative, they don't know how to feel negative emotion. And so that would be kind of where I would go with someone who said, well, I don't have any trauma. And I would ask those questions. How were you comforted? How were, how did your parents, because our parents were the nest we were born into. So whatever our parents were going through, whatever their trauma was, whatever they'd lived in, that's the nest that we were born into. And so,
Okay. So this is it almost like makes me feel sick in my stomach, and I'll tell you why. But empowering too. Um, when my youngest daughter Holly would come to me in tears, she was not comforted. I would say things to her like, "You could have it so much worse. Put your chin up." But I know better than that today. But when she
yes.
was 9, I didn't,
Mhm.
and
Uh-huh.
that's trauma.
It is.
And
But you
it was
were,
never intentional.
no.
I thought I was doing right by her, or I was
Mhm.
doing the best that I could.
Yes, absolutely. We all are because we are parented. We parent most of the times the way we were parented. If people had terrible parents, they might do the exact opposite, right? But you and I grew up this way too, where children, my family, children will be seen and not heard.
Yep.
And pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't cry. And if you're going to cry, go to your room and come out when you can be act nice or whatever.
Yeah. Be
And
sweet.
so, right, so what we were sent away. I was sent away because I can just speak for myself. I was sent away to manage my emotions by myself. I think I spoke last time that both my grandmothers were alcoholics. So both my parents had alcoholic mothers. So there was no nurture in my family at all for them. So they did not know how to nurture and they would not do it. Well, we know that nurturing and this self-soothing is a huge component of being able to be regulated in our adult life. Well, if
Hmm.
we never learn that, then we don't know how to do it.
Yes. And what do you say to people who say, they have suffered trauma, but they're our age, for example, and they're like, I think I should be over it by now. I'm over it. Like, what do you say to that?
Well, because a lot of people say that and they're like, there's no reason to look back. And that I would just ask them because our past, the only reason we look back is to see how our past is affecting our today. And our
Sure.
past is always affecting our today, whether we know it or not. Um, because how we react in relationships, how we respond to crisis, to be um, all of that is relational. And so if we have relational trauma, which is what CPTSD um, is then that will show up in our adult relationships. And relationships really are the key to joy in life,
Yes, yes, yes.
right? And
Right.
so if we don't know how to communicate, if I get my feelings hurt, and I'll just speak for myself. So being highly sensitive person, get my feelings hurt. Well, my view of the world and my lens was completely incorrect. It wasn't accurate, but I didn't know it wasn't accurate,
Hmm.
right? Because it was all I ever knew. So that is extremely important to know. Am I looking at this situation through the correct lens?
I think that's really important to name is because I think we all like I don't know when I'm dealing with people or for instance I have somebody in my life who is like this who's been through a lot of trauma and when they're going through something I'm like that is so not reality, that's not what I'm seeing. And
Yes,
it's so helpful to name that like that is what they are seeing. It's like
yes,
rose colored glasses, it's like the world is pink, I
yes,
promise, and you're like no,
yes.
no it isn't,
That's right. Yes. Yes. That's exactly right, Catherine, is being able to know that. So, Tara, when people say, well, I wasn't really affected, and so I'm not going to argue with people either, right? If people
Sure.
Right.
say, well, I didn't have any trauma and my life is fine, I'm going to say, okay, right? Then, because we just take things that if it works, use it. If it doesn't work, just throw it out.
Mm, yeah.
It doesn't. And so there are some people who don't want to do inner work and that's fine, right? I'll give you an example. So if my husband's listening to this, he's probably going to go, "Oh, cannot believe you're going to share my stuff too," but I'm going to share his stuff too. So my husband, on the outside, right, looks very calm and poised, and like he can handle anything.
Hmm.
But what was really happening when we first got married, because I'm outward, right? You can see all of my crazy. You could see all of my meltdowns. You can see all of my stuff.
Hmm.
So I always thought he was good and I was bad.
Oh,
I know. Well, that's my little parts, my little sweet parts, just always thought they were bad. But
but
they,
that's universal. I think that's worth slowing down for just a minute over because I don't think you're alone in that. Like you were outwardly bad habits, and he appeared to have his shit together, and you
yes.
saw good and bad.
Yes, I did. Well, that's how you know you're coming from child parts, really, is
Hmm.
because adults have the ability to see a wider lens because we've grown up. When we even call ourselves good or bad, or I don't want to get in trouble, those kind of things, that even language are child parts because that's child language. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to say that because I don't want to get in trouble. But what I've realized for my husband is the way he handled his trauma, because he had trauma as well, his dad was violent, is he just retreated inside himself. And so he would go inside and then kind of fade away internally, which that is dissociation, that is
Hmm.
withdrawal, that's actually kind of going into a freeze response in the fight, flight, or freeze. And so on the outside, it looked like he had everything together, but inside he wasn't present at all because he was so flooded, right? Those were his survival strategies. So sometimes just because people don't have an outward presentation doesn't mean that they are handling everything perfectly. It just means we can't see it.
Yeah. Wow. And it's still, I think what matters at the end of the day, if someone says, I don't need it, I don't need to look at this, I feel like the response to that in many relationships is, it's affecting the people that you love. If you're
That's
not
right.
going to explore it for yourself, explore it for the people that you love and you want to be in good relationship with. And it could be so much
Yes.
better. I do want to, how this goes by so fast.
I
I
know.
want to talk for a minute about distraction because I had a
Yes.
light bulb moment. You said that's one of those coping habits or functions. And I told Catherine after last week, I said, you know how much I love being by myself? I think maybe part of that is because I can stay the most distracted when I'm alone. Like
Mm,
I can do my research and my reading, and then I can take a break and watch a show and get on the phone. I can stay like in my zone. And I
yes.
think that might be. So talk to us about distraction.
Now, distraction, when we talk about firefighters and IFS and distraction, that was a huge one because, I mean, as a country and a culture, maybe the whole world, right? We are distracted and we
Yeah.
stay distracted. Um, and that is a coping mechanism many times to not stay in the present moment because one of the things people will say, well, I don't like to be bored. And really, what they're saying is, I don't want to feel anxious or I don't want to feel negative emotion. So we just stay distracted. And our phones now are just 100% away. We can, we Google it. Like I Google everything. I have thoughts in my head. I go down rabbit trails, that. And so distraction is a huge way that we don't stay present. That's what cigarettes were. When you were saying, that you didn't really have an emotion that you were linking your smoking to, I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking, well, yeah, because you didn't know about it because you were staying distracted. It was one of the pieces, right, of your distraction.
Right.
Mine
Right.
too. It was a piece of my distraction as well.
Yeah. Yeah. When after I've been thinking about this all week, like, of course I know what was driving that constant cigarette smoking, but it was always changing. Like
Yes,
at
Right.
first, I think it was probably distracting myself that I just married someone that I shouldn't have been married to, and then it was different emotions along the way, but it was absolutely my go-to
distraction.
addiction and distraction. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And so distraction and dissociation are called firefighters in the IFS model. And those are just ways that we just don't stay present to our emotions. And the emotions that we don't stay present to linger inside of us. And kind of what we were talking about last week, drive all of our behavior subconsciously, right? Like what you said, you weren't really aware of why you were distracting yourself. But when you thought about it, you're like, okay, yeah, during this season, I was distracting myself from this. During this season, I was distracted. Remember last week I told you that when we really pay attention on the front side, you're like, no, I wasn't doing it for any reason. And then you start thinking, you're like, no, there really was a reason. And you pay
Tons of them.
attention and then you can name it, right?
Yeah,
And once
yeah.
you can name something, we have to name it to be able to tame it, right? You have to name something to tame it. And most of the times people don't know. They just don't know. And this is why this model and this type of therapy helps us because it's loving, which I love that. It's loving, it's compassionate, it's gentle. And that really works for my system because my system was a very shame-based system that felt really bad. So needing a model that said, okay, so you have this behavior, kind of what's going on. Can you put judgment over here, right? Can we just put
Mhm.
judgment on a shelf and just stay curious? We don't have to judge ourselves for what we're doing. We just need to say, okay, this is not serving me. This behavior doesn't line up with my values. Okay, well, let me see, how is this behavior serving me? What benefit am I getting from this behavior? Instead of just saying it's a terrible behavior and you need to stop it. right? You're destroying your life, you're destroying your family, shame on you. That never works. Never, never, never. When behaviors are rooted in shame, you cannot shame out of people. You can't use shame to shame a shameful behavior, right? So most addiction is rooted in shame, right?
Right.
I am bad, right? So
Yeah.
shaming someone is not going to get them to stop the behavior, because you can't shame the behavior that's actually rooted in shame. But you can love someone, you can help them to understand it. You can say, let's just stay curious. And when we do, guess what? All the answers are there.
That's so beautiful. So beautiful. You know, Wilson went to AA meetings when he was in prison. Wilson is my son, if anyone didn't know that. And they try to shame him.
Of course.
Like, you know, just remember what you've done. You'll never want to drink again if you think what you've done, how you got here. Ah! Yeah.
Yes.
Oops.
Yes. But in reality, like, let's just use him. And I know we only have a few minutes left, but in that, you have named some of the things that happened for Wilson when Caroline had her seizures and stuff, and so if we took Wilson all the way down into his system to say, what part of you like was hurting, what was going on, instead of just shaming the behavior on the outside, kind of understanding what those behaviors he was utilizing, what purpose that they were meeting, what need was that meeting in his life. And then when you can understand that, guess what? You can meet the need, the unmet need. You can meet the need in the present day. That's that roots we're talking about. And the fruit takes care of itself, right? Because if you have, right, if we have, feelings of, well, I didn't want to bother my parents, right? Because that's sometimes what children, they were like, well, my sister was really sick, and so I didn't want to have any needs, right?
Yep.
Or
That was
I didn't want to say
100%.
what my needs were because my parents were so overwhelmed. I didn't want to add to the burden or stress, right? And so then I would say, so you really have a little child in there that needed some direction and love, but it's covered in shame. That need is shame based because you were ashamed to ask for something because you didn't want to flood your parents, right?
Yeah.
You
I
can
can't
heal,
wait for him to listen to this. Yes.
right? You can heal that, right? I mean, that he can heal that, right? Because that little part, children are not adults, and it's okay. And when you can heal that part to know that it's valued and loved and accepted, then we're not in emotional distress. And when we're not in emotional distress, because we've healed that, these behaviors that soothe that emotional distress aren't needed, right? They're not needed to the degree and level. And so when we don't have the urge, like Catherine was talking about last week, if we don't have an urge to do something, it's much easier not to do it.
Sure.
Right.
When we do have an urge,
100%. Yeah.
right? And the urge is strong, it's very hard for people. It's wearisome. It's wearisome when that urge is there all the time, and it just wears us down and we give in. And that's how the cycles happen. And so love heals. We'll end with this. Trauma blocks love, and love heals trauma.
That's
and
so
love
beautiful.
heals. Mm-hmm.
Such a great. If you have a few more minutes, I do want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to end. If we can just go a few minutes over and turn it over to Catherine, and if anybody has a burning question, if you can stay on, we'd be grateful.
Yeah, I mean, I think, thanks, Tara. I think this is really helpful because just watching Tara's reaction to you talking about Wilson, and I always think, I mean, it's hard for me not to tear up thinking about my kids and what I've probably done to them over the years. And we're all human, right?
Yes.
I heard somebody say one time, if you have trauma, it's because you were raised by humans.
Yes.
It's like,
yeah,
it's like we're all trying to do our best. But I think what I get the most out of this is like, we're all on a journey. It's okay. Like, I think my goal when I first became a parent was just not to do anything that would hurt them, create trauma, anything. And like, it's impossible. So it's like, how do we give the skills to them, but then really first to ourselves?
That's right. You can't give away something. We cannot give away what we don't have, which is what Tara was talking about. What you're saying is like, most humans that have children don't think, oh, let me screw them up as much as possible. We just are raising them the way we were raised.
Right.
Right. And so we're just giving them what we know.
Yeah.
People cannot give away what they do not have. And we didn't know. And so Okay, so what happens now? Parents always jump to my kids, and I was like, the best way to
Yeah.
heal your kids is heal yourself,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
And I just think I'm always like the solution. So I love what you said about last week about just pay attention to your thoughts, just get curious, right? Because when I can feel it, I can see it. And that's a really hard place to be when you start to name it and see it, but you don't know how to change it. It's awful because you're
Yes,
like,
yes,
but I think that's
yes,
one of the most helpful tips you've given is like, just stop and be curious and see what's
yes,
there. And it's
yes.
not bad. It's just, and then like not judge.
Yes, which is so hard. And even if we do judge, writing that down, saying, well, I have a really judging part, right? That's, I've noticed that, if I'm eating the cookies, I have a judger that is just ferocious inside. Noticing that's so helpful because doing that, we can help it point out the shame cycle, right? The judger inside is creating the shame that is creating the need to eat more cookies that we're trying to stop eating.
Great. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
so beautiful.
I'm going to actually ask Catherine to close us out in just a minute. And I just want to say that y'all didn't know Leigh 30 something years ago. And the way you talk about love, y'all, she was not like this. She was loving in this most ferocious, frantic, where's the next party? Bring everybody with me. She was still this passionate, loving person, but she didn't have this light and peace around her. And you are a shining example of how people can transform themselves with hard ass work. And I am so grateful for you that we are connected again. So I
Mm.
want to
Me too,
let
Kara.
Catherine close us out because I'm on emotional high right now.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you, Leigh, for being here. It's been just amazing. And so just want to start with love.
Yes.
And first and foremost, love yourself.
Yes.
Give of your resources, give your love to yourself and to those around you. Eat more plants, get your rest to get that system regulated. Laugh, get the endorphins flowing for that head back and laugh. And stress less. Get your sleep and don't forget to move that body. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Leigh, so much. It's been so helpful. It's wonderful. We'll see y'all
Thank you.
next time. And Leigh, we're going to have you back.
Okay.